If you only know Robert Downey Jr. as the man who was Iron Man, you're missing the most unbelievable part of the story. The years when the world quietly bet against him. The years when Hollywood didn't see a hero, just a headline waiting to happen. It's easy to watch the polished red carpet smile and assume it was always destined. But the truth is, RDJ's Kids versus Now transformation isn't just a glow-up, it's a survival arc. Because here's the twist. Robert's life didn't start like a fairy tale dream big and it happens. It started like a strange backstage pass to adult chaos. Film sets, fast-moving cities, and a childhood where boundaries were blurry and grown-up problems sat at the dinner table. He wasn't looking at Hollywood from the outside. He was born inside it. And sometimes that makes the fall even more brutal, because everyone's watching and they think they already know how the movie ends. In the 90s, he looked like the next great actor, one of those rare talents who could switch from comedy to heartbreak in a single breath. Then the narrative cracked. The public stopped asking, "How gifted is he?" and started asking, "Is he okay?" The industry that once applauded him began to fear him. Studios don't fear failure, they fear unpredictability. And yet, this is what makes his story sting in a good way. The comeback didn't arrive as a miracle. It arrived as a choice, repeated so many times it became a new identity. Then came 2008, a role that looked like a gamble on paper, a casting choice that could have ended a franchise before it started. Instead, it rewrote his life and arguably rewired modern pop culture. And just when the world thought the comeback story had peaked, there was another moment that felt like a final stamp from the universe. Robert Downey Jr. winning his first Oscar for Oppenheimer. So today we're doing what the internet loves most. We're putting the kid next to the man. But we're also doing what the internet rarely does. We're following the emotional thread that connects them. How a child surrounded by fame became an adult who had to rebuild himself from the inside out. Robert Downey Jr. was born April 4, 1965, in Manhattan, New York City, not as a starry-eyed outsider, but as the child of two people already living in the creative storm. His father, Robert Downey Sr., was a filmmaker. His mother, Elsie Ann Ford, was an actress who appeared in his father's work. That means Robert's normal looked like scripts, cameras, and adults who treated art like oxygen. His childhood was defined by movement, new places, new rooms, new versions of home. And mixed into that environment was something that would later become one of the most painful details of his story. Downey has spoken about being exposed to drugs at a very young age, describing it as tangled up with the emotional language of family, love expressed in the wrong currency. That's not a tabloid detail, that's a blueprint. Because when you grow up learning that comfort and chaos can sit in the same chair, it becomes harder to separate the two later. By the time he's a teenager and young adult, Downey isn't just acting, he's developing that rare, dangerous kind of charisma, the kind that makes people trust you even when you're spiraling. He enters the industry with an edge, sharp comedic timing, restless intelligence, and that spark that makes casting directors think, this one could be special. And for a while, the world agreed. He proves he can do serious work. He earns respect. He's not just a celebrity kid. He's an actor with gravity. Then life starts tightening like a rope. Pressures, choices, consequences, the weight of public attention. And the same industry that nurtured him begins to do what industries do when risk appears. Step back. So when we talk about Kids versus Now, the real contrast isn't just his face on a childhood photo versus an award stage smile. It's the difference between a kid who was shaped by adult worlds too early and a man who had to learn painfully how to be responsible for his own. RDJ's rise had a particular flavor, not slow and steady, but electric. He had the kind of talent that made people lean forward. In the late 80s and early 90s, he becomes one of those names you say with confidence, because even if the film around him isn't perfect, he is watchable. That's star power in its rawest form. But the same intensity that makes an artist brilliant can also make them vulnerable. And for Downey, the 90s become a decade where the story stops being about craft and starts being about control. The public record shows a series of escalating legal troubles and arrests through the mid to late 90s. And here's what's chilling about watching that timeline. It isn't one single bad night. It's a pattern. Each event making it harder for the industry to keep trusting him, each headline shrinking the room he can stand in. Then comes the moment where the consequences stop being theoretical. In 1999, after probation violations, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison, and he later recalled what that experience felt like in stark terms, describing it like being sent to another planet. He served time, and the damage was bigger than lost months. It was reputation, momentum, access, the invisible network of people willing to take a chance. And the cruel part about Hollywood's memory is that it's selective. It remembers your last mistake more vividly than your best performance. To studios, the question isn't, can he act? It's, will he show up and can we insure him? What happens next is where the story becomes something deeper than scandal. You see a man trying to rewrite the rules of his own life. Rehab, probation, attempts to work again. But even the comeback period isn't clean or cinematic. It's messy, repetitive, humbling. And then, like a door cracking open, the opportunity that changes everything arrives. Iron Man. In the mid-2000s, Marvel is building something big, but it's not yet the unstoppable machine we know today. Jon Favreau pushes for Downey, and there's resistance because of the baggage, because of the risk. This is the kind of behind-the-scenes moment that defines legacies. One camp saying, no, too dangerous, and one person saying, yes, because it's exactly the right kind of dangerous. Downey gets the role. He doesn't just play Tony Stark, he injects himself into it. The wit, the arrogance, the vulnerability, the sense that the character is constantly negotiating with his own past. And audiences don't just accept it, they lock onto it. The franchise ignites. The world begins to forget the headlines and remember the talent again. By the time the MCU becomes a global language, Downey becomes its face, an icon who turned his worst chapters into emotional fuel. And in a strange way, his most chaotic years gave him something most actors can't fake: the feeling that a smile can be both confident and haunted at the same time.
The dark truth of Robert Downey Jr.'s story isn't simply he got in trouble. That's the shallow version people repeat when they want a quick lesson. The real truth is harder and more uncomfortable because it involves how early life can wire you. When someone grows up inside fame, the world doesn't teach them patience. It teaches them performance. Applause becomes feedback. Chaos becomes normal. And when love is tangled with instability, the brain can mistake instability for intimacy. Downey has described how drug use was normalized in his childhood, and that detail changes the meaning of everything that came later. So here's the emotional peak. Imagine being a kid who learns the world's rules too early, then becoming an adult who is punished for not knowing how to live by them. Prison isn't just a plot point in his timeline. It's the moment where the illusion of invincibility collapses. In his own reflection, he compared stepping into that world to being sent somewhere you can't escape until the planets align. That's not the language of a man bragging about surviving. That's the language of someone admitting fear. And then comes the quiet brutality. What happens after? Because the hardest part of rebuilding isn't making one big heroic decision. It's making the same small decision every day when nobody is clapping. Staying consistent. Being accountable. Becoming boring in the best way. That's why his transformation resonates. It's not just a celebrity turnaround, it's a human one. The kind where you don't erase the past, you learn how to carry it without letting it steer. And the universe has a way of testing whether a comeback is real. It keeps giving you new stages. For Downey, one of the biggest proof moments came long after Iron Man, when he stepped into a different kind of role and earned the kind of validation that isn't based on fandom, but on craft. His Oscar win for Oppenheimer. It lands differently when you know the full arc, because it doesn't feel like a star collecting trophies. It feels like a person closing a loop. The kid, the chaos, the collapse, the rebuild, now standing in a room that once doubted he'd ever be stable enough to lead anything.
Here's what I think makes Robert Downey Jr.'s story so powerful and so easy to misunderstand. A lot of people turn it into a simple moral, don't mess up, or a simple fantasy, if you're talented enough, you'll be fine. Both are wrong, because his story isn't about talent rescuing him. It's about responsibility finally catching up with talent, and the painful work required to make them coexist. RDJ didn't become a legend because he never fell. He became a legend because he stopped trying to outsmart his own life and started trying to live it. And there's another truth people don't like to say out loud. Hollywood loves a comeback, but it rarely provides the tools for one. It praises reinvention after the fact. The rebuilding usually happens off camera, in routines that aren't cinematic. That's why so many people never return. Not because they didn't want to, but because the world doesn't make it easy to be a former risk. That's what makes the Iron Man casting moment feel bigger than fandom. It's a hinge in culture, a giant studio taking a chance, and a man understanding that this was likely his last chance at scale. And he didn't just behave, he delivered. Over and over, long enough that people stopped holding their breath. So when we compare kids versus now, I don't just see a before and after. I see a warning and a hope in the same frame. A warning that early chaos can echo for decades. A hope that the echo doesn't have to be the ending. And in an era where the internet loves to freeze people at their worst moment, RDJ is proof that a person can be more than the screenshot people saved of them. If you line up the images, Robert as a kid, Robert as a young star, Robert in the storm, Robert walking out in a tuxedo holding an Oscar, you can almost feel the distance between them like weather. But here's the nostalgic part. The kid version of Robert Downey Jr. didn't know he'd become Iron Man, and he definitely didn't know he'd become the face of a modern myth about redemption. All he knew was the world he was born into: art, noise, movement, grown-up energy. The kids versus now transformation isn't just a timeline, it's a lesson in how a person can be shaped by circumstances and still fight to shape themselves back. And if you're watching this as someone who's been through your own version of a fall, maybe not public, maybe not dramatic, but real, then this story lands a little differently. Because it says, your worst years can be part of your history without being the whole identity. The open ending here is simple, but it's the kind of simple that takes decades to earn. RDJ's story isn't finished because the point of the story was never the fame. The point was the reclaiming. The kid becomes the man becomes the myth. And the myth, if we're honest, only matters if it reminds us that people are allowed to grow beyond the chapter everyone remembers.